Well, goodbye to that plan. That lazy bastard has drained their energy cores. They're all empty because that fucker needed a fix. Madness? We are hurling through space at unknown speeds without any resources, and on top of nearly half the crew being murdered by tiny mechanical space. How long could you survive in space before hunger turns you into a monster? Tonight's story, written by H.R.Mason, is not for the faint of heart. It's the final transmission of a stranded shuttle crew, adrift, forgotten, and starving. It was colder than usual. Our shuttle's heating system had been acting up lately, but it was just one more thing to worry about, I guess. Worry is an understatement. I would bet whatever little time I had left that every one of us here were losing our minds. Our main concern was food and where to get it. The whole crew hadn't eaten anything in a week now, and things were getting a little bit strange. I could see the feral look in the eyes of some of the others, Betty and Craig especially, but I don't blame them either. Craig was skin and bone as is, and Betty was eating for two as she was pregnant. But Betty keeps looking at me like a dog would look at a stranger passing by their garden. Maybe I was getting weird, but up until last week we had all been on the same page. We really did work well together, but now, I don't know. I was so starved, not just of food, but of everything. My family back home, my cat, even the smell of the rain was something to look forward to. Thoughts and memories became vacant lots for one craving and one alone. Food. Sustenance was definitely consuming every second of my time now. We had all been expecting these days to come, ever since the shuttle was mistakenly spat out off course into the abyss of space all those months ago. But Poulter, the team lead, has been keeping us all sane, promising that an answer lay ahead. I don't know what state we would all be in if it wasn't him in charge. Well, that's my opinion. Some others feel different about Poulter's methods of leadership. "Oi, Poulter! Where are you hiding?" shouted one of the engineers. Shannon, a broad man with skin as thick as a rhino and a head just as tough. He had lost almost half his body weight within the last week, and has resorted to hunting down any nomadic insects he could find to eat. No matter how many insects he found though, he wouldn't share a single leg or antenna with his crew. He bashed on Poulter's door until it slid open with a whoosh. Poulter, with his long loose brown suede jacket on him, stood eye to eye with Shannon. "What is it, Shannon?" said Poulter, clearly irritated from being disturbed. "Any progress on whatever it is you are doing?" Poulter gave Shannon a long dead stare, completely expressionless before clearing his throat and smiling. "Yes, I have made some progress, as I said I would. Shannon, if you would be so kind as to gather everyone into the common room." Shannon looked a little puzzled, but asked no more questions and just did as he was told. Once all crew members had arrived in the shuttle's common room, Susie, the only member who seemed unfazed, began handing out blankets for everyone. Betty and Craig, Chris, Shannon, "Here you go, Nim. One for you, Chuck. Poulter, do you want one?" asked Susie. She was the youngest of the crew, fun, full of hope and naivety. "No thank you, Susie. I am fine. Everyone, as you know, we are en route back towards Keglar 42 thanks to Chuck's remarkable idea of inverting the airlock panels to propel us backwards. But as much of a win as this is for us, we won't last the time this trip will take. We have little water, no food, and how about oxygen, Susie?" Susie's smile faded away as she looked at Poulter, shaking her head and looking down slowly in defeat. Okay, no, it's okay. Listen, I found a land body that is reachable. It has a water pocket, so possible life, which means possibly food, maybe even a bit of O2 in the water." The crew looked at one another, some in disbelief, while others were hopeful. "So what's the plan, boss?" asked Chuck. "We send the tractomites out when we can get close enough to see what they can find, and we can harvest a bit of the O2 with them while we're at it." Shannon stood up and pointed at Chris, who was trying to stay awake. Well, goodbye to that plan. That lazy bastard has drained their energy cores. They're all empty because that fucker needed a fix. Chris, are you serious? Chris was so juiced up from the Tractomite's energy cores that he could barely lift his head. I thought I didn't... Poulter whispered to himself. Right, plan B. Manually. And we have to time it right. We, the crew, prepared ourselves for the oncoming land body. Myself and Chuck gathered all the hundreds of Tractomites and brought them to Shannon, who then linked them to the shuttle's computer system. It began synchronizing them up to the headsets. The headsets are used to manually control the Tractomites. They are a swarm of miniature robotic data analysts. They collect data using cameras and sensors, and can even extract materials. Everything gets sent back to the shuttle. They are a very smart tech and can be independent, meaning they don't actually need a human to control them, but that is when they have charge in them. Chris was not able to do much due to his condition and was cared after by Susie. Betty and Craig teamed up together and headed for the shuttle's anchor turret room. They were as quick as they could be. The body of land was hurling towards them. Without fail, they fired the anchor directly at the body of land and it grabbed a hold. This body of land was one big rock. It was only 5 times bigger than the actual shuttle though, but the body of water was unmissable. Craig left Betty in the anchor turret room and joined with Chuck and Poulter to place the now synchronized headsets onto all of their heads. When all was ready, Shannon tuned a dial, lighting up the entire shuttle with a dim blue hue. The Tractomites, barely bigger than bees, were released out from the shuttle's extractor chute and swarmed towards the newly discovered space rock. The crew, with the headsets, not only controlled these Tractomites, but could also see what they see. Shannon gave them barely any time before asking, "Anything?" "Hold on, Shannon. We are at the water now," said Poulter. "It's actually kind of lively. Kind of electric," said Craig, with more wind than words behind his teeth. Betty walked by the room holding her underbelly bump, getting a good stare at her 3 colleagues standing motionless with the headsets on. Shannon was kept busy behind some screens while I was monitoring the progress when I heard a scream from deep within the shuttle. "What was that?" asked Poulter, unable to see from the headset no matter what angle he tilted his head. "I'll check it out," I shouted back as I ran out the door. That scream could only have come from Chris, Susie, or Betty. I jumped over Chris's fetal body, sped past Susie, who was also on her way to Betty. It turned out Betty was in labor and I was way out of my league. Thank God Susie was there. That girl was a saint, so gentle and calm, yet firm and in control. Betty was so malnourished that I did not expect her to survive the birth, but miraculously she did. The baby, Emily, looked healthy, plump, almost appetizing. Thankfully, Susie was there to deliver that baby because I do not know if I could, and if so, if I would have let the baby go. Things were getting desperate. I left Emily with her mother and Susie and ran back to check up on the mission. As I ran, I could hear a commotion. Sparks and beeps that were not meant to be there dominated around the corner at the end of the corridor like a rat hole in the trenches of war. I ran into a nightmare. Shannon was smashing Poulter's head against the tabletop, smashing it over and over again. He had gone completely mad. I wondered. Chunks of blood and pieces of the headset were spitting everywhere. Craig and Chuck were holding their headsets, screaming in agony, struggling to remove them. At first I thought the two wanted to help Poulter from Shannon, but it was the headsets that were the problem. "What the hell is going on?" I screamed. Shannon looked at me with a horrific look in his eyes, as if I was the source of all he feared. "It's in the fucking water! Get these headsets off them now!" "What? Fucking help!" I ran over to Shannon's side and grabbed a hold of the headset on Poulter's head. It wasn't budging. It was just a headset though, it should have slipped right off. But the closer I was, the better I saw. Hundreds, if not thousands of tiny little Tractomite creatures were tunneling their way from the headset speakers into the ears of the crew. As much as I knew these were the Tractomites, they looked slightly smaller now, and way more aggressive. Within minutes, myself and Shannon had to stand back from Polter as we watched him become consumed from the inside out. The nano creatures fled back into the cables of the headset and joined in on the ones eating Craig and Chuck. In only but a few moments, the crew had lost 2 of its members and its leader. They were no more than cleanly picked skeletons. And the enemy had vanished into the background, into the internal workings of the shuttle. We could hear them writhing within the wiring, buzzing and humming. Shannon and I did not let out a single breath. We sat in the humming silence, trying to strain our ears for a sound, anything else, but there was nothing. That was the scariest part. "What's so scary about silence?" Shannon asked me. "Well, Betty just had a baby, and it was screaming a minute ago, and it suddenly stopped. Shit, come on!" The 2 of us sprinted around the corner, down the hall and into the room where Betty was left with Emily and Susie. For the first time ever since we set out on this shuttle, Shannon was left speechless. It was evident that Betty tried breastfeeding Emily, but there was nothing to feed her with, so Betty was feeding her baby with Susie. Betty just stared up at us with those dead eyes. "Emily was hungry. What else was I supposed to do?" Shannon dropped to the floor without warning. I only stayed standing because I was locked in place, in shock. Betty sat there holding one of Susie's fingers up to her baby's lips. "Can you get Craig?" Betty cried. "Craig? Craig is dead, Betty," I said coldly. No emotion, no rhythm to my words. And there is something in this shuttle with us now. What was left of the crew daydreamed to the sound of Emily suckling on Susie's finger. Hours passed. Chris, Betty, and Emily were all fed now. It took a few heartbeats, but eventually, I also caved in and surrendered myself to the hunger. I hope Shannon can understand. You see, Susie is his daughter. With the hunger gone for now, the craziness had settled. We were trying to digest our regret, disbelief, and the sudden urge to jump out of the shuttle. We buried Susie under the bones of Polter, Craig, and Chuck. Betty did not seem fazed that Craig had died, or any of the other crew for that matter. She was obsessed with her baby, and now Shannon was obsessed with her. I did admire his restraint though. Things were getting very tense here. Once it became clear where the food was and how to get it, the 4 of us became a little more isolated, trying to stay off the menu. The others were looking for their next meal while I was looking for a way off this shuttle safely. The buzzing around the shuttle was difficult to ignore. Between them and the remaining crew, sleep was not worth the risk. And yet, I woke up. Breakfast was a silent occasion. Well, almost silent. No one spoke, only chewed uncooked virgin meat. The only seasoning was that of age. 20 years of maturing flesh. Shannon was nowhere to be seen, probably mourning the loss of his daughter that we were all eating. One would wonder if her sacrifice was worth it. She would only feed us for so long before she became putrid. So, big bites. I could hear those things whizzing through the shuttle. Were they watching us, hunting us, or were they just waiting for something? I went looking for Shannon. The shuttle wasn't too big, but you can easily hide. Although Shannon wasn't really the type of man to hide. I found him in the room where the other 3 had died, Craig, Chuck, and Polter. He looked like he was examining something. "Shannon, what are you doing?" My voice was shaking. "I caught one of those fuckers. Those nano things." "What? How?" Shannon turned to me, showing me his hands. Both were shredded to bits and one was missing a thumb. All that was there was a chewed up bone. My first thought was, where was that thumb? And if the meat was still attached and fresh? But I shook that nasty thought from my head. In his hands was one of the smallest mechanical bodies I had ever seen. A thorax, 8 legs, and a set of wings as big as its body, which was no bigger than my little finger's nail. Shannon could see I needed answers. "These things are our tractomites. They are half the size, but it's them." There was something in that water, some sort of microscopic organism that can manipulate their anatomical structure of, well, as far as we know, tractomites. Just don't know how or why they haven't done anything to the shuttle yet. These organisms, or even just the water itself, has completely evolved our tractomites into these smaller, more deadly pieces of equipment. Mechanical devices that eat people. I am not entirely sure if eating is the correct word, but regardless, they will kill us. It does not matter how in the end. What is it? It's nothing, shrugged Shannon. You might as well tell me. You might think this odd, or impossible, but I'm pretty sure they are multiplying. Shannon, that is madness. Madness? We are hurling through space at unknown speeds without any resources, and on top of nearly half the crew being murdered by tiny mechanical space insects, I just watched my youngest daughter be eaten by a mad woman's baby and then shared for breakfast. It all just happens, doesn't it? I could see the pain in Shannon's eyes as they watered with his words. He was a madman making sense of what he was saying. If we were going to survive, I needed to come up with a plan. Yes, Shannon, it all just happens. A voice came from outside the room, a weak voice, trembling. His words were too cold and slow to leave his mouth. "Speak up!" shouted Shannon. Chris slumped into the room and dragged his feet across the floor before collapsing. "Chris!" we both screamed. Shannon went to his aid but was useless with his hands all cut up. Shannon just sat there and pitied himself. I tended to Chris, but it was too late. He had died there and then. We put his body with the remains of the others, and all that remained of the crew was myself, Shannon, Betty, and Emily. A few more days passed and we managed to survive by eating Chris. There was not a lot to go around to begin with, but so long as Emily was kept fed, I was happy. Her mother was losing her last few marbles. She keeps muttering to herself and tearing out strands of her hair and chewing on them. I do not like the way she looks at Emily sometimes, as if she is hers and hers alone. Shannon is also getting a little too close to Emily. I can see him salivating at the thought of the taste of her. I will protect that baby at all costs. When I woke up next, I couldn't believe my eyes. We were approaching a planet. It was far, but it was reachable. But how? There was nothing to see earlier but white dots on a black canvas. When I found Shannon, I asked him how we got there. "Nanobiters is what I am calling these. Well, these little biters contain osmium, which is an incredibly dense material." "Okay, so with the amount of them buzzing around in this ship, and then multiplying, I'd bet my boots that we have added a few tonnage to our cargo, and as a result of that, we are now sinking through space towards that planet." Shannon pointed at the large swampy green planet growing larger and larger. "And what will happen once we break the atmosphere, assuming it has one? We activate the emergency parachutes and pray to whatever god watches over this planet." Ran as fast as I could to give Betty the good news, but what I found was something I'd never wished to look for. Betty was feeding Emily with one of Betty's own fingers. 3 months ago I would have thrown up on the spot, but now I can imagine what that tastes like. The iron-enriched blood, thicker than water but still trickles through the teeth. The grinding wobble of the chewy bone underneath the flesh. The salting tenderness of the skin snapping after a good strong stretch. Oh, I envied that baby. My lips started to quiver at the thought of getting a bite of one of Betty's fingers. A lick, just a taste. I walked over to Betty, absent-minded as to why I was here in the first place. She had tears in her eyes, more than likely from the pain of losing a finger. Well, she'll be crying more in a few moments. I had already justified this in my head a long time ago. Betty had lost her mind. She is a goner, and that baby would be far better off with myself rather than her. So I crept up behind Betty as she fed Emily, and slowly wrapped my hands around her neck, squeezing with a gradual and consistent grip. I could feel the tendons and the veins protruding against my palms, pushing back with the last of her life. Her heartbeat was hidden in there somewhere, getting softer and softer. thud, 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 thud. And then the baby was mine. Betty slumped her whole body flat to the ground, and I lifted Emily up, placing her in a bag. I began chopping Betty up and packing her away in a collection of different tubs, organs and all, fingers and toes for snacks on the go, and I bottled up a few litres of her blood. Unbeknownst to Shannon, I had several bags of food packed and ready to go for once we landed. The shuttle raged through the atmosphere, barreled through the skies. We were safely strapped into our chairs, but that did not matter too much. 4 out of the 12's emergency parachutes attached to the shuttle did not deploy, so our straps were put to the test. They also failed, but we were here. This planet was okay. The shuttle alerted us to the oxygen level being at 23%. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. The area we were in was swampier and grassier than that I remember of Keglar 42, but manageable. I could see some wildlife, but it will take me some time to understand how they operate and if they are edible. Same goes for the vegetation here. Shannon died on impact. We never thought to tie things down, and a monitor made a sandwich out of his head in the wall. But that was okay. More bags and tubs for me to pack. Between Shannon, Betty, and the baby, the weight I was carrying was monumental. But I will survive on my own. I'll be fine. I might set up post here at the crash site and then venture out bit by bit, day by day. There might even be a civilized people, much like myself, living here. Who knows? I am just incredibly fortunate to have survived all of that and came away with an unlimited, live food source. But she is still small, so I'll just have to take small bites, nano bites.